If you've always wanted to make box joints, it doesn't get much simpler than this. Several years ago, I got into making these sliding lid box joint boxes. And my kids noticed me making them and they each wanted one, so I ended up making one for each child. And of course, my daughter Lexi had to personalize hers by putting her name on the lid. But these are a lot of fun to make. They are great gifts. All you need to make them is a box joint jig and a router table. Today, I want to walk you through using an ideal jig for this project. It's the Rockler router table box joint jig. It's really easy to set up and really easy to use, and it's just perfect for this kind of a small box project. So let's get started taking a look at that. The jig consists of an MDF base that locks into the miter gauge slot of your router table using a pair of expanding miter bars and knobs. There's also a plastic sled that comes with 3 solid brass index keys for 1/4 inch, 3/8, or 1/2 inch box joints. All you do is screw the appropriate size key to the bottom of the sled. There's also an MDF backer board that mounts to the face of the sled with a couple of screws. And the sled even has a spot for onboard storage of the index keys. And I've milled a bunch of parts for my boxes. I've planed these down to thickness, and I cut them a little bit over wide so that I can trim them down later after I route the box joints. I also made just a couple of test pieces from the same thickness of stock, and I'll use those to set up the jig. So the first step to set up the jig is to set the router bit height. I've got a 1/4 inch spiral end mill installed in this router bit because I'm making 1/4 inch box joints. One of the things you'll notice though is that the base covers up the adjustment hole for the router lift. But there's a couple of simple solutions here. You can either drill a hole in this base so that you can get your wrench down in there, or if you're lazy like me, just loosen the knobs and slide the base over. And now I'll use one of the box parts as a gauge to set the height of that bit. I'm just going to raise the router bit until it's just standing a hair proud of the surface of that workpiece. A little bit more. That's good. So that will cut the box joints a little bit long. The pins will be a little bit long, but after you assemble the box, you can sand those flush. Go ahead and take that wrench out and just slide the base over the bit there and lock it down. Now the next step is to set the spacing between the router bit and the indexing pin. To do that, I'm going to use a setup bar like this one. It's a 1/4 inch setup bar. And I'll just slip that between the pin and the bit. Loosen these knobs on the base a little bit, and then just slide the whole base over until that setup bar is contacting both the indexing key and the router bit. And then I'll go ahead and lock those knobs down to secure the base. That's all there is to it. Now we'll go ahead and make some test cuts. Now to make my test cuts, I'm going to grab one of my test pieces and just butt the edge up against that index key. And then I'll slide it through the router bit to cut the first slot. And then step that slot over the key and just move on down the line, cutting slots along the whole edge of the piece. Now to cut the box joints on the mating piece, I'll just turn the first test piece around and set it over that index key, and then butt my second test piece up against that to cut that first slot. That fit is too tight. I can't even get them to fit together. So I'll have to make the pins a little bit narrower. And to do that, I've got to move this indexing key closer to the router bit. So to adjust the key, all you have to do is loosen the 2 knobs on the base of the jig and then slide the whole jig over just a little bit. Now I'm ready to make another set of test cuts. Now that's what I'm talking about. So full disclosure, I had to make 4 test cuts in order to get this fit. But that's just the name of the game when you're doing box joints. You do have to do a little bit of trial and error to get a good fit. And that's another reason why once you do get a good fit, don't just make one box, make a whole bunch of them, because you don't want to have to go back and set that up for another one. Now that I've got a test cut that I'm happy with, let's make some boxes. I'd mark the top edges of all my box sides with arrows so I can keep the parts oriented correctly as I cut the box joints. I really like the look of that. Now that I've got everything dialed in on the jig, I'm going to cut some more box joints, then just make lids and bottoms, and I'll have a whole set of boxes. Well, I've spent a lot of time using this box joint jig now, and it's really growing on me. And I'll tell you, one of the key features that I like about it are these indexing keys. Now, we use the 1/4-inch key for the boxes we made, but the process is the same whether you're using the 3/8 or the 1/2-inch keys. But those keys make the setup fairly automatic, so there's just not a lot of effort involved. It's an easy jig to set up, easy to use, and it's definitely a keeper for my shop. A couple things to point out. You do need a miter gauge slot in your router table in order to mount the jig. And this jig is ideal for small projects that I like to make, little boxes and drawers. If you want to make larger projects, I'd recommend replacing the sacrificial fence with one that's a few inches wider, and that'll give you a little more support for your workpieces. But all in all, this is a great jig to have, and I'm sure you'll love it. So I'm keeping this one. To get your Rockler box joint jig, just click on the link in the description below. And to receive more information on new tools, tips, and techniques, be sure to sign up for our e-notes by going to thewoodsmithstore.com. And just so you don't miss anything, be sure to click on the button below to subscribe to our Woodsmith Store YouTube channel.